Bene amici, oggi siamo a Otranto e...
Well friends, today we are in Otranto and we are on board the Italboats Stingher 28 GT. I'm with Andrea Risolo of the shipyard. Good evening, Andrea. And we are here offshore to test the hull powered by a 400 horsepower Mercury V10. As you can see from the front camera, the weather conditions are optimal as a test because the sea is rather calm. There is an annoying wave raised by the wind, so we will also look for the performance of the hull. And at the same time we will monitor the stability. I am currently in displacement. I am at idle with the inverter in gear, 3.5 knots, consumption 4 liters hour at 600 RPM. We are currently 2 people on board, we have 35% fuel, and there is no water in the water tank. We then start sailing, trim totally lowered, we have active trim active, so we can sail without thinking about the trim at all because the engine will correct all the speed on its own. And so we continue to push the throttle. 2000 RPM, trim always fully lowered, 9.5 knots, climbing, 10 knots, consumption 18 liters hour. Let's see how the wake is forming at the stern. The 400 horsepower engine represents almost the maximum engine that can be installed on the transom because we even reach 450 HP, while the minimum starts at 300 horsepower. We can therefore estimate a very low glide of 10 knots, but we give further throttle to get the hull completely out of the water. The power of the V10 allows you not to think at all about the 1500 kilo dry weight of the boat because it manages to provide incredible torque. We will gradually see the change of pace as we continue cruising. 13 knots, 2200 RPM, 19 liters per hour. Let's keep going up. Obviously electronic throttle and therefore very sensitive. 3000 RPM, let's see how we begin to relax. 21 knots, 21.7 knots. But when we reach full planing, we also reach 22 knots. Consumption 31.1 liters hour. Therefore, really excellent consumption. Low cruising speed because the engine works without any kind of effort, but we still go up. You see, we also cross the waves at the same time. We have them in the stern quarter, so we could also expect a bit of heeling, but as you can see from the front camera, we are always constantly in safety. The deck is always dry, and we can also risk some maneuvers because the construction quality is at its highest levels. Currently 25 knots, 3200 RPM. We start to turn left. Look, the tubes rest constantly in the water, so the roll is reduced to a minimum, constant angle and no problems. Now we are starting to see how the hull behaves with the bow wave and at the loof with a strong wind. We can also expect some splashes that rise on the front camera. But currently it is very comfortable to cruise at this pace because the impact is really well cushioned. And speaking of impacts, we don't feel any type of vibration from the onboard structures because there are gaskets underneath each locker, so every impact is perfectly dampened. Let's keep going up. Now you see, we cross the waves, but we will look for the shelter to reach top speed. At the moment we are simply testing the hull. Trim that raises slightly. We also give a further manual tap, we raise the trim, we arrive at 25%, therefore less wetted surface and therefore the impact is also softer. 26 knots, 3500 RPM, consumption 39.6 LH. We continue to raise. Look at how the engine changes pace and he doesn't feel any fatigue at all. 4000 RPM, 30 knots. We go further up and also look at how we manage to stay comfortably in the command post because there is a large windshield to give full protection on board. So we are able to be comfortably at the helm, control the rudder with one hand, the throttle with the other. Obviously the lanyard stop is always well fastened. We raise the trim further. We arrive at 40%, 32 knots. Consumption 54 LH at 4000 RPM. We still have a lot of gas to give. We see that at this moment we have the edge, so we can push. 4500 RPM, 36 knots, 5000 RPM, 38 knots. We lower trim slightly to make a turn. Turn at 36 knots. Andrea, are you ready? Go. 32 knots. Totally left turn. Look here how we remain perfectly balanced. It seems like we are in a car. Pass me the term. And now let's push the throttle and raise the trim. Fully pushed 5,000 RPM. Trim 50%, 5,500. 5,600. 45 knots. What a change of pace. 48 knots. 49. We decelerate slightly. We turn and continue to exploit the area protected from the wind to push again. Trim 80%. Very little hull in the water. 49 knots. 49.9. 50 knots. We break away completely. 51 knots. And now we are here in full fun because I also show you what this engine is capable of. Further turn. Let's go down. I would do this all day. 29 knots turn. Look here. Very calm on board. Also look at how we always remain safe because the tubulars are very generous. From 24 knots, 25. If I push the throttle, this happens. The engine roars, 30 knots, 31, 32. Look at that change of pace. We also notice how the hull comes off. But now all we have to do is put it in neutral and see the start from a standing start.
Eccoci quindi a folle, abbiamo soltanto una leggera onda di prua.
So here we are at neutral. We only have a slight bow wave. The sea is almost totally calm at the moment. We put the rudder in the center, lower the trim, and all we have to do is count. Andrea, are you ready? Let's go. 3, 2, 1, go. Throttle pushed. Look at the acceleration. We are already at 9 knots. I raise trim. 20 knots, 23, 30, 32. I can't follow the indicator. 40 knots, 41, we leave the shelter, 45, trim fully raised, 47, 48, 49 on the wave, 50 knots. Burning acceleration for this boat and above all paired with this engine. The wind you feel comes from the side because as I told you we have passed the shelter, but now we make another turn to the left by playing with the throttle. Look, we also jump on the wave, we hold on and no problem. What a boat, what a hull, and also what an engine in this case. And so dear friends, this is the Italboats Stingher 28 GT powered by a Mercury 400 V10. It is a rib that I recommend to all people who want a lot of livable space on board, because as we have seen in the presentation on board, the layout allows you to circulate at any point on the boat while remaining comfortably safe. And also as regards navigation, we can reach 50 knots without ever having a drop of water on board on deck with perfectly cushioned impacts. And you told me that with this engine in ideal and optimal conditions, we can therefore easily exceed 50 knots because we have reached 5,800 RPM, so we also have a little more tolerance range that the engine can offer us. And so dear friends, unfortunately I have to return to port. As always, if you liked the video, I invite you to subscribe to the YouTube channel and the Facebook page, leave a like and tag the people you think might be interested. And as always, for all the next videos, we'll always see you here on the Sea Team. Thanks again, Andrea.
Ci vediamo sempre qui su The Sea Team. Grazie ancora, Andrea.
Grazie a te, Carlo.